So before I start, I want to say that this is being recorded and it will be put on my website. There are parts of the panel that I will ask people for their input, questions. There's Q&A at the end. If you want to share and you don't want it put online or anything like that, feel free to come up and say, hey, I participated and I don't want my segment online or anything like that. Cut it right out. Perfectly fine. No pressure or anything like that, all right? Another thing is, since this is a GameCon, I talked about a couple of video games in this. There are some slight story spoilers. I'll mention the games before that and all that. The games have been out for over a year though, so they're not like brand new games that came out last month or anything like that. But I figured I'd give people a fair warning. If they don't want a spoiler, they're free to leave. It won't be anything that ruins the whole story though or anything like that. It'll be small little details, nitpicking, the representation in the game or possible representation and stuff like that. So I'll let these people sit down and we will start.
Oh, yes.
Alright, everyone else settled? Good? Alright, cool. So first I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Lucian Clark. I run a queer horror website called GenderTerror.com. It's a relatively new website. Originally it started as my personal blog, writing about all kinds of different queer issues and stuff like that. Then I got kind of burnt out. So in the end of August, I decided there's not a lot of queer horror websites if I don't think of any at all. So I decided to reopen the website as a queer horror website. So what we do is we have different artists, writers, media reviews, stuff like that, all contribute to the website and we all put it up. We do have a Patreon, stuff like that. So a little bit about me. I've been involved in horror ever since I was a little kid. The oldest story I have is I asked my dad when I was 5 to watch Hellraiser. He said yes. Probably not the best parenting decision, but that's where it all started. So for me, I've always been involved with horror, stuff like that, ever since I was probably too small to be involved. Horror is definitely a genre that I love dearly, and I've noticed that people who love horror are they go above and beyond. It's something that everybody has a personal connection with. Everybody I've talked to, the artists, the writers, there's something in horror that draws them to it. Whether it's the monsters, the unknown, something, they always have that pull towards horror that makes them feel that it represents them in some way. So horror, it has its downfalls. Horror is known as kind of a cliche genre. It falls on stereotypes, at least in the mainstream media. Most of the gay characters they can't be the flamboyant, and then they die. There's no character development for either them. The women in horror movies are generally blondes with big boobs, and then they're dead. Most of sex scenes and then death are very rampant in horror. But for some reason, we're drawn to it. There's something about horror and the explanation of the unknown. I think it's that unknown that pulls us into horror. Even in movies like The Thing, where we see what the horror is. It's this monster, this alien, but at the same time, we don't know who it is, what it is. The best horror movies are always those that just leave that little bit unexplained, that little bit, that mystery to it. And that expands just not in like movies, but in games, comics, anything that has a story. There's that mystery to it that's a very vital part of what makes horror horror. And I feel that's why queer people tend to be driven to horror in such a deep way, that mystery. They can inject themselves into horror without having to worry about, well, maybe not. That mystery allows for a lot of exploration. So does anybody here have any stories, like personal connections to horror for why they personally are involved in horror or anything like that?
So I studied horror films in college as my bachelor's degree, and studied the uniformity of horror, like across the world. And what drew me to it is that there's certain things that no matter how culturally it's different and expressed differently, there are certain things that scare the hell out of everybody no matter where you go. So like cinema in Korea might be different, or in the United States versus England or Scotland, but it doesn't matter. There's still, like, we're still afraid of the dark. We're still afraid of, and everybody can connect to that sort of fear. And then how it's culturally expressed is kind of cool to look at also.
Really draws into that, like, that unknown aspect of, like, the dark. If you look at all the common things, it's that unknown. What's lying in the dark? What's really behind that curtain? Stuff like that. Anyone else?
Well, for me, I think, you know, being a trans person and before that identifying already, you know, as a gay person, I guess I don't identify as a gay person anymore. But, you know, I can identify with the monsters.
There's actually a whole section about that.
That's like almost a trope. Like, I think there's currently a game on Kickstarter that is like about monsters. But anyway.
I saw you had your hand raised.
Oh, yeah. I've always been really, really fiercely attracted to things that focus, games and movies that focus on psychological horror and that whole aspect of like going, am I going crazy? Is this really happening? Like games like Videodrome, games like Silent Hill. I feel like most likely because of the fact that I deal with like neurodivergencies and mental illness that there is a relation there or an understanding there that I don't really find in a lot of other media.
I've been working with haunted houses for about 3 years, I think, mostly at a year-round venue, and like that raises a lot of, like I like psychological horror, but it also raises a lot of questions. It's like what people are scared of, why are they scared of that, and that even gave me like, what am I afraid of? And I've had like time to, you know, try a bunch of different things, like what makes people scared, or what makes them uncomfortable, or what makes them vulnerable, or feel that way.
I think for like horror games in particular, I'm constant, like, because like despite the fear, like, especially with the hero, despite all of this, they triumph over it. And like Heather from Silent Hill 3 was like a core part of that. So like, I don't know, like, whenever I stumble on something like that, it's hard to get like cling onto it. So.
Backcourt, yeah.
I remember for a long time I saw this movie that called Privilege Project.
Yeah.
That like really messed me up for years.
And you never see the witch. You never
You never see the
Oh,
witch.
no.
And it went into this kind of like, is it real? Is it not real? And they marketed it as a real thing, and it was really kind of came out, and it just like resonated me with to like my core. And then like you see like how like there's horror games coming out now, like with PT and Outlast, and now the new Resident Evil, who are doing this like first person like horror perspective, and I think it's just like this callback to this like found footage genre that kind of like freaks out our entire generation.
Anyone else? Yeah.
For a long time, like I'm also like very drawn to psychological thrillers, but it's also because they make you think. Like it's not like inherently just like okay, boo, jump scare. It actually gets a lot more interesting than that. Also like the involvement of mental health, but I also think that there are a lot of stereotypes with that that just like they just feed off of it because there's not anything else to write about. But I think the really interesting stories really like come out of things that you don't expect, and I like that that element that I just like, oh man, I didn't see that coming, and it's really hard to get that in like any movie, so I kind of seek those out.
Sorry, this is
You're fine.
another thing. It's not necessarily as much of a personal thing as I feel like good horror, you see this particularly with, I guess, less horror, but zombie type movies, is that it's never really about the zombie. It's about, you know, how difficult circumstances, what they bring out in people, and so I find that interesting. And sort of, I guess, a complement to that would be science fiction being a somewhat related genre. Is like science fiction is not about the future. Science fiction is about the present day. Horror is not about monsters. The horror is about us. It's like it has a social commentary aspect on it.
Definitely, and the social commentary aspect is actually something I feel people project themselves onto in horror. I feel horror has a lot of ability for people to, not in person, but like project their own selves, their own experiences. Maybe it might not be identifying with the main character as the hero overcoming this horrible thing. It might be with, as you said, the monster. When I reopened the site as a queer horror site, the first article I wrote was actually called Monsters of Our Own, a look at monster symbolism in the trans community, and how a lot of trans people, there is a running thread of how people identify in different ways with monsters of horror movies, whether it's being the outcast, being the misunderstood creature, not even seen as human, being seen as subhuman, being seen as something horrific. So that was definitely something that I saw, and it really drove me for how people connect with horror movies in different ways, and how people look at them differently from their own perspectives. It's almost a blank template, because horror does tend to go into stereotypes. There's not a lot of character development in horror, so we get a lot of blank slate characters that we can input ourselves. So I identify with this situation for this reason, and you might have someone say, oh, well, I took this situation as something completely different. And there's that ability to mold. Horror is something that has lasted throughout time. It's been since the beginning, whether it's been stories about the big scary beasts in the woods, to now where we have an influx of things like serial killer, ghosts, or a big thing that was coming up with paranormal activity and stuff like that. So, and unfortunately, things like mental illness falling on the stereotypes of, well, it's scary, it's unknown, it's the other. So I feel like horror has a partial attraction for queer people for that reason. But there's also people who identify with things in like an aesthetic type of way, of not just like a personality, but they like the dark, spooky aspects of horror. So the more like the ghost houses, the things like that. It's pretty diverse for how horror expands in different universes. From psychological horror, where we're the monsters, we're our own worst enemy, to the generic, oh, there's a slasher flick and you're running from Jason. So horror has a way of expressing itself across all different boundaries, regardless of gender, race, sexuality, stuff like that. But the way we connect to it, we impress onto it our own experiences. So regardless of the main character, we find ways to identify within the sphere of what that world is. In a video game, it's a bit more interactive, so we have a way to control the character. For games like Until Dawn, we control their actions, or things like that. So I feel like horror video games add another aspect that in movies, where you're sitting back and just watching it as opposed to being enthralled in the experience and part of the experience. Being part of the experience allows us to go into a different mindset when we experience horror, and I feel that video games allow for us to explore that mindset much more deeply than a movie or a comic book can. So when it comes to video games, I have a couple theories for things. Who's here has played Until Dawn?
I've watched somebody play it.
It's a very tropey game, right? How many people would think there's a gay character in Until Dawn? You're cheating because you know. So,
I don't remember.
So, does anybody remember Sam, the blonde girl who was, what's her face, is Hannah's best friend? The gal pal.
Is spoiler warning or?
A little, it's not, I'm not going to talk about what happens to Hannah or anything like that. It's more of when Hannah was, yeah, thank you. So Sam, when she is introduced and you get her little thought bulb, unlike the other characters, who don't express their connection to the two main characters in any way other than friends, she is expressed as Hannah's best friend. Emphasis on best. The way she reacts in the game to certain notes, the way she goes about the game. I'm trying to avoid spoilers for anyone who's going to play Until Dawn for like super deep spoilers. But there is a running idea that Sam is gay for Hannah. That the best friend idea goes into not only the gals just being pals wonderful trope, but also into the erasure of, well, we don't want to have a gay character because that pulls from all the stereotypes of, well, this is all teen sex, and all because every other character has a tree with another character. It's all straight pairings through and through, besides Hannah. You don't really get a romantic option to explore personality-wise with Hannah. She is the only one who isn't explored in that sense like any of the other women. With characters like Ash, with her crush, you have all the personality abilities, because the way Until Dawn works, I should probably explain that first, is it's mostly quick time events, but you also have various options for how people interact with each other in the house. And there's 8 different characters that you control throughout the game. And how you interact with each character changes how they react to each other, the situations you'll face. The game's key mechanic is the butterfly effect, where one choice you do beginning of the game is going to affect something later on. How a character is going to react to this character at this key pivotal moment. And with Sam, she is the only character that you don't get romance options for with any of the other guy characters. Even the girls that have multiple abilities to flirt with a couple of the other guys who have flirty options with this specific person, Hannah doesn't get anything. But Hannah is also explored as the level-headed one. So she also falls into the trope, unfortunately, of where the level-headed one is not the one blinded by sex. She doesn't get a sexuality, where everyone else is oversexed. She gets nothing because she's level-headed, she's not blinded. So I have a feeling with horror, the way that we look at these characters, and they're mostly flat personalities. As I said before, horror is not really known for its branching character development, except for maybe a few games like Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3, where you do see the characters and learn about the characters. Those games are focused on characters. Whereas games like Until Dawn, they're more about the experience. So these games, movies, comics that focus on the experience allow for this blank slate effect that I don't feel is in any other movie or genre except for maybe action movies. But even then, there's more of a less personal aspect with genre movies than horror movies. Because with horror movies being scared, it's very intimate. What scares you is something very personal. It's something very deep for most people. Generally, you don't want to share what scares you, you know? It's something that you yourself want to keep just in case. It's personal. So I feel that horror movies, because of how close and personal horror and fear is and intertwined, they allow for this blank slate. Now, another character that is very queer, going back to Silent Hill 2, is Sybil Bennett. Everybody knows a Sybil. Pretty obviously a queer-coded character. What?
Silent Hill 1.
Silent Hill 1,
Sorry.
but or the movies, depending on, you know. But Sybil is a very, very queer-coded character, which leads into, once again, queer people, if they're in a horror movie, it's either pushed to the side as, here's kind of something for you. We're not going to say they're gay, but you can put the pieces together, or you can put yourself in their shoes and identify with them, or they're quickly killed off, which I'll talk more about the, you know, the dead gays trope that isn't just a horror thing. It's pretty elsewhere.
Pretty everywhere.
Pretty everywhere. Does anyone have any other characters that fit that maybe not area, that gray area? Doesn't have to be video games.
Barb from Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's the example of it.
Barb, definitely, yes.
Or no, for Barb.
Yeah.
Why don't you make us think?
I know, right? The worst. But that leads into another problem. Queer people and horror.
Last of Us?
Huh?
Last of Us?
Last is Ellie, yeah, but
Yeah,
she's pretty explicitly surprising. One of the few.
Yeah.
One of the very few. But tragic lesbian.
Life is Strange. I mean, I don't know if you can consider that horror. I suppose it kind of is, though.
It's horrible.
That ending's a bit.
I liked it. I liked it.
Huh?
Gone home.
Gone Home,
Yeah.
definitely, yeah.
I thought that game was gonna be a horror game.
Yeah, a lot of people did.
And then I was like,
Yay! But there's not a lot. That's,
Wait, are we talking about characters that are explicitly queer, or?
people are bringing up a lot, but like characters, also
Implied.
characters that you think might be.
And the
but
only reason I
aren't.
ask is because for a bunch of those I haven't played them, but thought that they were explicitly queer and was excited about that, and I was like, oh, are they not? That's disappointing. So,
Yeah.
But okay, so some of them aren't, some of them
Mm-hmm.
It's more comedy than horror, but in the web thing, Welcome to Hell, Sock Sawachowski is a guy who's voiced by a girl and is implied to be like extremely in love with the other main character, but the creator just is completely silent about it and doesn't really like bring it up at all.
Gotham on TV. Sorry, spoilers for this season. But, yeah, Penguin.
No.
That was a nice spoiler.
I mean, but it's not confirmed either. It's like weird.
It's an implication like everything.
Yeah.
Persona 4.
Mm-hmm.
Not
It's-
horror, but a lot of like Metal Gear Solid, I've been a pain in some of those games. They do that thing of they get so close,
So-
but they still leave enough gray to be like, oh, but they're not gay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of characters, though, even if they are actually queer, they never say it.
Mm.
It's either heavily implied in certain ways or said in things like, well, I don't like girls, or I don't like boys, I don't like this. Or, well, it's never flat out said that, well, I'm gay, I'm trans.
Wonder Woman.
Yeah, yeah.
Wonder Woman, yeah.
Here's a big one. Daryl Dixon.
Mm.
It's been is he,
Yeah.
isn't he, and it's been coded for like every
Forever,
season.
yeah.
Yeah.
It had.
Yeah.
it's
I'm
in
glad I
there.
stopped watching that
Yeah,
show.
it's heavily coded. That
It's
he-
very heavily coded, which with horror I feel is more of a problem than other genres for having coded characters. And I feel that's because of the intimacy that, once again with horror, and also the stereotypes. They're afraid to say, well, this character's gay, and then they die. Or they'll play on the stereotypes and it's very obvious. There's no in-between ground for horror. It's either all the way out there or not at all. Which is why queer horror in itself is so important, because it allows queer people to go, I like this, I'm going to put myself in this, and I'm not going to fall into all the gays are dead trope. My character's not going to exist for one episode or 1 minute of the movie, do a little, hey girl, and then die. So, anyone else?
Oh, Charlie from Supernatural.
Supernatural is
Yeah.
very,
She lasted for like 2 seasons or so.
Did Saw ever have any featured queer people?
I don't think so.
In the what 7 movies they had, 5 movies they had?
No, I don't think there's.
I don't think they ever
No,
presented
not
a
one.
Not
single
even
queer
an
person.
implied, just like.
No.
It
Just
was-
no, these are all straight people who deserve to
Yeah.
die.
That
But-
might be better.
Yeah, probably at this point.
Winona Earp.
Yeah.
I like that show. I was
But-
actually surprising.
but of all the characters that were mentioned, how many are main characters? Especially in horror, none. Not a single one. No. None.
I mean, not in video games, and I don't know if this is necessarily horror, but the closest to that would probably be Willow in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah,
Yep.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer is definitely,
That's all.
Like that's actually confirmed.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Which
Buffy
I-
has its own problems with different things, but that's
Yeah.
one of the things they did right.
I haven't played Life is Strange, but is one of the both main characters? I don't know how it works. I've seen the trailers for it. Am I wrong? Is that-
Once again, we bring up Life is Strange,
No
and the Life is
spoilers.
Problem.
No spoilers.
Am I gonna be sad if I go play it? Because I just kind of assumed that the characters were queer, but I don't actually know anything about it.
I will talk to you about Life is Strange after if you don't mind spoilers.
Sure.
I think whether or not they're queer depends on how you play it, but I'm not sure.
It does,
That's part
but
of
there's
it.
also things.
Yeah.
In the misrepresentation panel, they mentioned Life is Strange, and it's very hard to talk about that game without vicious spoilers. And I know
Yeah.
people want to play it, so.
Yeah.
I'm on episode 4.
Yeah, exactly. It's not necessarily horror either, so it's going to be it's not really too relevant, but it is a example of a queer characters in media.
Renly
But,
Baratheon from Game of
Yeah.
Thrones. Yeah. I mean, that one's overt, and also the punishment he gets for it is
Mhm.
really overt, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
and
And a lot of
And-
norms.
Yeah,
Dorian.
Loris, the Tyrell, yeah.
So, moving on. Who here's played Soma?
Oh, I have.
Some of it.
Some of it. This was a game that I figured that
I
I was
need
like,
to
more people will probably have played Until Dawn than Soma.
I really
Uh,
like Soma.
I love Soma.
I think it's my favorite game I've played.
I love Soma to death. And I have a theory about Soma, and it's a game about being trans. So, with Soma, I'm not going to spoil main story points, but there are some spoilers in here for some surprises, so to say. So you play as a guy named Simon, and you wake up, and you're not human anymore. You're in a spacesuit that is comprised of a dead body. A woman's dead body. And yet, you're still Simon. So, the game is a game about what makes somebody human. What makes us who we are, what makes us our personality, our identities. And the other person, quote-unquote person you meet, Catherine, is also stuck in a robot. And I won't spoil how they got there, or why they're there, or anything like that. But throughout the game, your body starts to break down, and you need to be transferred into another body. This other body that Simon gets transferred into also happens to be a woman. Now, I do not believe that is a coincidence that both bodies Simon is transferred into are women. Is that my personal feelings on it? Was it a game developer's personal choice to do that on purpose? Was it something they overlooked and didn't think anything about? Very possible. But that goes into the idea that, once again, horror allows us to project our own stories, our own ideas that we might not find elsewhere. So because of how Simon's journey is, and it's the exploration of identity, when Simon's transferred to this new body, his other body is still alive. So which one's the real Simon? Are they both the real Simon? So Soma is a game that is very, very heavy-handed with the what makes us human. What makes that Simon the real Simon versus the old Simon? What makes us who we are as people? Is it our experiences? Is it our physical beings? Is it a combination? So these two bodies are people that the other person knew. And she talks about them a little bit. But the heavy-handedness of the identity and injecting the character into two women, I think is on purpose. Once again, I might be projecting. But he never questions his identity based on the bodies. Catherine never brings up the idea of, oh, well, you're a girl now, ha ha ha. That joke's never made. It's never implied. It is literally, you're still Simon. You're just transported in these bodies because they're what's available. But I feel that that lack of exploration is something that now, I am now invested in this game and exploring myself. As a transgender person, how does my physical body, who I am as a person, connect to one another? So Soma allows for that exploration into, okay, would Simon be considered trans because he has no physical body? The game doesn't explore anything based on gender. It is pure what makes us us. The end part of the game, not going to expand on that, delves farther into, okay, who we are, now we have no body. And it's heavily implied that who we are is based on what we experience. Who we know, our thoughts, personality, but at the same time, if two people exist in that same continuum, who's considered real? Is it the person who was there first? Is it the person who was there second? The way the body transfer for Soma works is that you get all the memories before. It's like a coin flip. Is the one you're controlling going to be the old one who has all those memories and still thinks they're stuck in that body? Or is it going to be the new one who gets to explore and continue? So it's an interesting way of simplifying certain things because obviously we can't really explore. We are physical beings. We're not in a computer program. I don't think. I hope not. but our bodies and how people react to our bodies and how people see us obviously impact the way we interact with the world. It's unavoidable. So with Soma, it's definitely a simplification of identity because it completely takes out the physical aspect and it takes out the interaction aspect of it so that we never really have to deal with that. So the game allows some, but not enough exploration for my taste. But I feel that it's more of a trans narrative than the game developers intended it to be. Another game that a lot of people project a trans narrative on is Yume Nikki. Anybody familiar with that game? So Yume Nikki is a dark exploration game. It's a Japanese game done by a single creator called Kikiyama. And you play as a character who is presented as a female character, but there's varying imagery in the game that have people believe the character is a trans guy or a trans woman. It can be interpreted both ways, which means there's also the possibility that the character is non-binary and thus going back and forth. The main character experiences a lot of phallic imagery in the game, which for some is coded as penis envy. For others, it's hatred, it's a reminder. There's also very blatant uterine imagery in the game. So once again, envy versus hatred. The character can go into both the men's and women's bathrooms. So there's a lot of whether or not, is it just for the sake of the exploration part that you can do that, or is there more to the story than we're quite understanding? As far as I know, the creator has not commented either way. The creator actually likes to remain in the dark about what the game really is about. And the other themes of the game are isolation, loneliness, things that are kind of, unfortunately, pretty well known to the trans experience. There's a lot of fear of going out in public. You don't want to deal with other people. So it's a game that, once again, because it is so open, because it is so known, because it is such a blank slate, people take things, repetitive things, whatever imagery, and attach themselves and their own interpretations to this. And I feel that horror requires that, at least at the current time, because there is no representation in horror when it comes to queer characters. And what little representation we have is either kind of sword toe in line, Sybil Bennett, or full out, now you're gonna die in 2 scenes, sorry. Does anyone have their own theories about certain video games that people might not, or even movies? No?
In what capacity?
Just theories that, well, I see it as this way. Most people might not see it as, queer or as an underlying theme, but it's something that I identified with and was something I was able to project myself into a space with.
That Bugs movie.
Yes. It's not horror, but in the, I can see Frankenstein as super queer. A lot of people say Hellraiser is super queer. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hellraiser's all over the place.
With the
Yeah.
robots.
What about Hellboy? Would you consider Hellboy?
He's fine. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's that bad trope too, though. It's like the sexually aggressive,
Yeah.
very clearly coded gay dude. Black leather.
Yeah, but then there's also the main character who classifies himself as one of the first Scream Queens.
Oh, that's true. That's very true.
Yep.
I mean, that's all something inside you coming out of it.
There's also Halloween. A lot of people, there's like a running theory that Michael Myers is coded as somebody who tries to kill femininity because he identifies with femininity as opposed, and that's why he's putting on that mask and tries to step outside. And yeah, there's like this whole, because otherwise his narrative doesn't make a ton of sense. Otherwise, in a lot of ways, so they're trying to read into his motivations where there is none.
The projection aspect of it,
Yeah.
which as I feel I don't think is in a lot of other types of media, because there isn't that unknown that is so prevalent and required in horror. That unknown is so important to the aspect of being able to put yourself in those situations, or to be able to see stuff that, oh, I can identify with this in certain ways.
Well, I mean, I feel like there are several examples in older movies and newer movies about that are actually awfully transphobic.
Oh God, yes.
It's like it's just countless examples of things that are like not representation, not things that you could read into as remotely realistic. I don't know if I even want to.
Silence of the Lambs,
I was
Insidious 2,
about to say that. Yeah.
Insidious 2.
Psycho.
I really love it.
Psycho, yeah, I mean, there's
the-
like
Psycho, the new movie that's coming out, Split.
Oh god.
Yeah, yep.
No, that one's
We
awful.
we saw a commercial for that one and got yeah.
Yeah, the representation of mental illness in that is
Now I really want to watch the
positively horrifying. It's
Remind
just
me of United States terror. It's not a.
No, but no. What Split is? Split is basically is a person who has dissociative identity disorder, kidnaps some people, and one of the personalities is a woman because ooh, scary trans people,
Oh, that's double.
scary mentally ill people.
Yeah, that's
It's bad. It's really bad.
But there was that recent movie that I don't remember what it was called that was using transition surgery as body horror.
oh god.
Oh, that's the one I was thinking of when you said Split, because I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the one with James McAvoy. You're talking about the one with Maria. What's her last name?
Yeah.
Oh god.
Mhm.
Jesus.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
it's like examples of, you know, transgender people in horror movies. Like, long list. None of them are.
None of them are positive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, going back to older media, the first time I reread Phantom of the Opera after I transitioned, or after I began transitioning, there's such a huge narrative of trying to change your appearance to fit in with society. And there's one scene in particular in the novel that I don't recall appearing in most modern adaptations of the work, where it mentions the Phantom going out onto the streets of Paris and wearing a mask that's so realistic and lifelike that I think they may actually even use the word passing in one of the English translations. But basically he's talking about how he tries to pass in Parisian society. I was like, well, that's familiar.
I'd consider the Phantom of the Opera to be a monster in certain terms, going back to the trans people identifying with monsters for whatever reason. But going to the horrible representation in horror of everybody, literally everybody. I don't think, besides straight white cis dudes, horror has done everybody wrong. Everybody wrong. And I feel that's why we look at horror and we dig deeper, maybe a little too deep sometimes. Maybe. I'll admit, sometimes a little too deep, in my own opinion, to find something we can identify with. Because we go, we like this media. It's fun. But can you not? So, I want, that's why I feel queer people creating their own horror, queer people creating horror for themselves is so, so important. Because it allows a space to explore these characters in these worlds and in these situations that mainstream horror media just can't do without going the extra mile to be offensive.
I think American Horror Story actually does, they do wrong to everybody just like everything else, but it has some really interesting narratives. Season 2 especially delves into dealing with conversion therapy, which in a way that presents it as, oh god, no, this is exactly as awful and terrible, and Freak Show has a lot of stuff about gender dysmorphia and issues of body issues like that. So I don't know how I feel about that show at all. Half the time,
It's all over the
it's just awful, but sometimes it has good representation, so I can't be sure.
American Horror Story is definitely all over the place.
I have a comment about conversion therapy, something I came across from when I was researching game design with researching, and also from other types of therapy, is that one of the most successful types of clinical psychotherapy today is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
And conversion therapy comes from the same person, and it turns out that there are many things that you can basically brainwash yourself. Sexual orientation is not one of them. But it's like, at its genesis, they were, it was, it's one of those things where I don't know if it's a historically accurate representation of the background of it, because it was rooted in a lot of the same things that have become very central to clinical psychotherapy, and the way it exists today is very different from the way it existed when it was originally created.
I think the show tries to do broad strokes representing mental illness in that season. I think, right? But like,
Yeah.
but and a lot of it is bad. But I think in that, like, that's the one scene where I sort of went, maybe they're actually trying to do something here that gets across something well. And I'm not sure. I think you're right. It's like all over the place. Like, yeah, I can't be sure.
But like, going back to things like conversion therapy, queer horror can explore things that are very real to us in very real ways. Conversion therapy, rejection, oppression, things like that. It can allow us to explore these things in ways that I think straight cis people trying to write these situations, they don't get the nuances quite as well. They can't do the social commentary. Generally, when horror tries to do any kind of social commentary, it's not good, for the most part. I'm not going to say all. There are some that still get it, but...
Well, in a lot of zombie-type horror in particular seems to have a lot of examples where the villains, being not the zombies, obviously, are cis-het white men. I mean, the sort of the original zombie movie being Night of the Living Dead. The protagonist is, a black man, and there are some like really, really annoying white men in the movie.
So the thing with horror, though, and I don't think horror ever really tries. I shouldn't say ever. The reason that you see cis white guys being the killers is because they're trying to appeal to cis white guys for the most part. They don't really consider anybody besides cis-het white guys to be really into horror. That's why most of the main characters are going to be the people that generally live, not all the time, are going to be the type of heroic cis white guy who rah-rah fight through it. Not all the time, sometimes, a lot of times, more than often I would say, more than like action movies and stuff like that, there will be female protagonists who survive. Heather from Silent Hill, obviously, being one of my favorites. But I don't think they're trying to be subversive when they show, I mean, once again, personal interpretations going into showing that what we take from it, I think, is more important usually than what they're going for. Yeah.
I think it's important to note that a lot of this, what we're talking about, is Western horror.
Yes,
here.
definitely.
Like, yeah, so like, if you look at the cultural shifts are very different. If you start looking at things like Japanese horror and Korean horror, like the focus is not necessarily on the same things. And I think if you look at in some other parts of the world, you do see a shift towards narratives that are a little bit more open because they're dealing with different things. So like German horror films especially are existential in their horror, which allows for a lot more diversity of characters because they're not talking about like bodies and they're not talking about sexuality. 99% of the time they're talking about nihilism and like the end of the world and stuff like that. So it gives more of a space for I guess the way I always described it is, oh no, it's not just you who's screwed, everybody's screwed.
Everybody.
Yeah, it's just everybody's horrible and the world is crap and that's it. And like, so I think it has a lot to do and a lot to say more about how we in the West see horror.
Yeah, definitely.
Than anything else. And like, I like thinking about The Hostel, for example, as a film is that movie I think is really subversive. Actually, it's about punishing Western people. Like it's all about like taking that idea of like Westerners going into the rest of the world and being horrible people and then punishing them. Or The Purge, for example, is kind of subversive. That's a horror film about like, you know, basically minority people standing up against the establishment and trying to survive, and spoiler alert, most of the time actually succeeding when they're fighting back against these like heterosis white dudes. So like I think that there is places where that now like this new wave of stuff is like tossing it on its head a little bit.
Definitely. I think horror is definitely evolving. I'm not going to say it's stagnating. However, horror tends to evolve much, much slower than the rest of media. And I think that's partially because it's still considered a niche part of media. It's not like your action flicks or your comedies or anything like that, which need to stay with the times to be relevant. Horror always finds a way to appeal to something somewhere because it is so tangent on the human experience of fear. It doesn't have to necessarily evolve as fast to continue to remain relevant. It can always play on the same ideas of the unknown, the dark, the serial killer, the ghosts. So, I saw your hand go up.
Do you think horror movies as opposed to like horror suspenseful video games, or one is progressing faster than the other?
Horror games come out less frequently than horror movies. Even in the indie scene, definitely not as frequent. So I would say movies are progressing faster than games, only from the sheer volume that we get.
That we're getting.
I mean, you have things like Cabin in the Woods, but then you have Until Dawn, which tries to pull a Cabin in the Woods, but not quite as well, I would say. Cabin in the Woods being its own flipping horror onto its head kind of thing. Really good movie. Would definitely recommend. But I feel like movies also have an inaccessibility that video games do. With indie games, I'm not going to say everyone can pick up and make a game. That's just not it. But a lot more people can get up and make a little simple Flash game. I would consider something like Dysphoria a horror game in and of itself, and that's a little indie game. And there's a bunch of smaller indie games that can explore things on a much smaller scale in a much shorter time than a movie. Also cost-wise, even making an indie movie for most people, for cameras, crew, actors, is maybe out of reach for most people. So while I think when it comes to movies, they might be progressing faster, I think games have the ability to explore more in depth at a faster rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it's an immersive media.
Yeah, it's an immersive media so that it's more accessible to than for people to create their own stories than movies are. So I do think we'll start seeing horror video games on the uptick while movies start coming down. So they'll start catching up to each other.
What about books? I know we talked mostly about movies and games, but what about books? Because I know with your website it's a lot of writing.
Yes. With books, for mostly queer horror, I've seen mostly anthologies. It's short pieces. Queer Fear 1 and 2. There's one coming out that I was asked to review, All in Fear, which is queer horror romance. It's basically a bunch of queer romance novelists taking a crack at horror. And that comes out the 1st. But books are kind of, I don't know, they're their own little area. Horror writing has always been dominated by a couple people, and then everyone else is indie and left to the wind. We do have the one vampire novelist, I forget his name. It's been a long day for me. I can't remember it. He's a trans guy. I can't remember it for the life of me, of course.
Urban fantasy has a lot more of it. Kim Harrison's novel has queer protagonists. There's a lot more of that in urban fantasy. For sure.
You said something about an anthology coming out soon.
All in Fear. It's an online book, so it'll be like an ebook.
if we're talking about like indie media, the reimagining of Carmilla
That was
is
good.
completely like open.
And vampires in general. I mean,
yeah.
let's interview the vampire. Let's talk about
Oh yeah,
that.
Anne
Like,
Rice.
Yeah, vampires have more queer narratives than any other part of the horror genre, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I feel like werewolves are the patriarchy.
Well, because they have the pack structure, it's all about the alpha male, like stuff.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's always about that. All the series are like that. About werewolves.
I think there was one book that I read where you had like a bisexual werewolf, and that was like interesting.
And there was Lost Girl, the TV series.
I love
That
those,
was
yeah.
urban fantasy. That was-
In that whole series of The Other World is a woman werewolf protagonist. But unfortunately, it's kind of tropey because she's the only female werewolf kind of
Oh
thing.
yeah.
Alpha and Omega has that too, where she can rule everyone with her kindness because she's the only woman.
Well, it's not that
It's
it,
terrible.
but it's not that bad.
Yeah.
But
That one's pretty bad.
but
Pretty
it's-
awful.
being the only female werewolf is really tropey. So I'm gonna open this to Q&A. So go ahead and throw it at me if you have anything that.
I'd be curious to kind of get the room's opinion on, speaking to international film, High Tension, and
Ooh, I like that movie.
yeah, it's a pretty fascinating narrative. I mean, for people who haven't seen it, it would be a major spoiler to kind of even go into it too much,
Yeah.
but I'd be interested to kind of get the room's take.
Is that the French movie?
Yes.
Okay, I know
Wait,
exactly
what's
what
the
movie
name
it
of
is.
it again?
That
It
I.
was so.
High tension.
Yeah, it's really
Mhm.
good.
It's really good.
Fantastic.
On the list.
Yeah, I'm just curious to kind of feel
If you haven't seen it, see it. It's great, but we can't tell you why.
Yeah. Yeah, if you spoil it, it's over.
Yeah.
The important question, is it on Netflix?
I don't think so.
It was.
No, it's
It's on iTunes.
Oh, it's.
Actually, it's, by Google,
If
Google said.
it's a
I
pretty
think so.
graphic and brutal movie.
It's very edgy.
I mean, it makes sense why. Once again, I can't. I mean, yeah, it's really hard to talk about without. Yeah.
Go see it.
It's like big trigger warning on the front, but if you can deal with it, it's worth watching because it is really, really good. But it goes to some fucked places.
It
for-
really does.
Yeah, a lot.
For a few hot minutes, I should say.
I can't even say like compare it to what I want to compare it to because I think that'll spoil the movie.
Yeah.
The only thing I will say is it does get a little confusing because the movie is in reverse.
Yeah.
Put a pin in that conversation.
So,
Oh, no. Okay, it's me.
Oh,
Oh,
and then
Oh,
go
yeah.
to her, and then you. Okay.
just since someone else mentioned something like that people might be interested in, I watched like a year ago the Babadook.
Babadook's really good.
Yeah, so I guess maybe everyone knows about it, but like I like very often don't like how mental illness is done in movies, but like that movie like I didn't realize what the point was until I got to the end, and then I realized it wasn't even really like a horror movie exactly,
Mhm.
but like you get to the end and like that was really cool. I don't know, if anyone hasn't seen it, like it's definitely worth watching.
it's really good.
And the message like it's also not often that like I watch a movie and like the message has an impact on like the way I see the world or myself afterwards.
Mhm.
But like that was cool. I got to the end and I don't know, it was really interesting.
So the Babadook isn't really a queer movie.
It's not-
but
yeah,
with
it's
the
not
way
queer,
you
but-
would say the
but
way
for
you
mental
interpreted
illness.
it would be being able to project in yourself
well,
into
not
it or
that,
not at all.
like it's not in a queer way, but just because people were also talking about mental illness in
Mhm.
representation in films, and it definitely to do with mental illness.
There's really good. I've seen it too. There's really good neurodivergence representation of that in like the main character's son, as well as I feel personally kind of the main character. Although there's more going on with her that I don't want to spoil if anybody else.
Yeah, I think it's I agree and would not.
Kid
I would
has
recommend.
hardcore ADHD, and it's portrayed very well as someone with hardcore ADHD. Very well.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend not looking up what happens, like
Yeah.
just experiencing it.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how you feel about first-person games, or sort of like Five Nights at Freddy's and like stuff where you're put into the where the identity of the character is you, like it's an empty shell
Mhm.
avatar. So like, how does that change, in your opinion, sort of like the like as a queer person stepping into the shoes of somebody?
Mhm.
Does that necessarily change your experience as much, and is that doing enough to insert, queer identity into characters.
I don't think it's doing enough.
Right.
First-person games do allow a definite aspect of immersion, but I think it really depends on the game and the kind of the themes of the game. Like with Five Nights at Freddy's, while there is a storyline to it and stuff like that, it's not as much about the character themselves as much as everything else. So I feel like because Soma's a first-person game, but I mean you're playing as Simon, but I feel that allows you to inject a little bit more into the character and maybe Simon is trans because of blah 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 blah, as my wonderful interpretation of Soma
I
is.
think that sometimes empty characters for you to project on is also done out of sheer laziness in a lot of games. Because they don't feel like writing an interesting character, so they're like, oh, it's you the whole time. All right, maybe write next time.
That's definitely a cop-out. That's why I said it depends on the game. Depends on, is the game about story, or is the game more just, jump scares and the experience of the game as opposed to the story of it. You know what I'm saying? Like, is it meant to be, okay, you're actually supposed to be this person. Okay, well, if I'm being this person's not straight. Or this person's not cis. So I feel that it has to be more story driven than jump scare driven, or more. I shouldn't say just jump scare driven because I'm not just talking about Five Nights at Freddy's. I'm talking about the other games where it's like first person shooters, like Fear, stuff like that. There's a great storyline in Fear.
I really enjoyed that game.
Huh?
Like the entire series. Just
Yeah. So I feel like that where it's a first person shooter, but there's a story. You can inject yourself, you can toe the line a bit easier in that than as something that's meant to pull you just into the game, in the game world, as opposed to the game character, is what I'm looking for.
I think I had a conversation with a friend of mine who played BioShock and was a trans woman, and basically said that like the narrative of like body modification and such as stepping into this character kind of changed the narrative in a way that I never would have thought of. We had this whole conversation about it, which is why it brings it up to me that like your personal perspective on things in a first person can sometimes, and that was a completely other conversation I never would have thought of. So.
Once again, being able to project.
Yeah, exactly.
You, and then I'll go to you. So.
To kind of add on to what Liv said, and also some other people said about like stereotypes, we actually talked before like horrible examples of like representation in media, especially games. I remembered that when I played through Outlast, I retroactively realized how many god-awful things are in that game, both it and especially its DLC. And it's something that like that makes me want to ask you like what are some of your personal like not great experiences? I'm realizing I'm asking the same question I asked at another panel earlier today.
That's fine.
What are experiences you've had where you have that experience, either you've gotten through it and you look back and you're like, oh god, that was terrible, or you see something and as you're playing it, because you are able to have that projection, because you also have that awareness of this ableism or this transphobia and queerphobia, et cetera, like that have just completely destroyed something for you and just been like, ugh.
To think about that one.
Aside from Outlast, because it's fucking garbage.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Outlast. I don't know about completely destroying.
Ooh.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are we?
Code Veronica.
Code Veronica.
that'll do it.
Oh, thank God, my sister and all these weird transphobic.
Insidious too.
Yeah. I mean,
I got to the end of that, I was like, oh god. Why
I never saw that, but now I don't want to.
don't.
If you like the first one, it'll ruin it for you. It'll really damage it.
I'm trying to think, like what. I generally try to research things because it's just not worth the investment. Can't think of anything right now off the top of my head. I know it's a lame answer. I know watching the. Okay, here we go. Just for Foreign Heart, the Fatal Frame movie. I am probably the only one in here who's ever watched it, and it actually features a lesbian main character. And I don't know if that's a victim of the movie just being horror itself, or just Japan not being the greatest with things. But that I know I couldn't finish the movie, and Fatal Frame is something that is very near and dear to my heart. Probably a little too much. But something will probably spark. I'll probably tell you later. I can't think of anything right now. I saw another hand. I know you had a hand up.
Yeah, I've still been kind of thinking about like the topic of like books when it comes to horror, and also like the bury your gaze trope, and how that, if I was wondering about your or the audience's thoughts about how that like might or might not tie back to like the pulps of the mid-1900s, where it was like a prerequisite to get published that any queer character had to end up straight, unhappy, or dead, or a combination of all three.
I think the kill your gaze thing kind of ended up playing into horror. I recently read a comic based on a movie called Elena, which falls very, very heavily into the there's no happy lesbians trope. And I feel that horror, because it's so stereotypical, because of the way that horror functions, that the kill your gaze trope, they kind of looked at that and went, we're running with it. Because very few queer characters last until the end. There's very, very few that are either the protagonist. I don't think there's any really, very that I can think of that are explicitly, except for Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I know I hear you back there. But most of it, it's just they're in there for a flash and then they die. Horror tends to see queer characters, minority characters as very, very expendable. So unfortunately, I think it's one of those things that it kind of ran with.
It seems like sometimes they put those characters into media to make it seem like they're being inclusive, but they want to make a half step to including the diverse people, but they also don't want them to be the mainest character, the most important character, the one who survives, so then they just get rid of them.
Yeah, I also can't stand when, like, especially when it's like, I don't know, like Disney or something, they'll like, hint at like some character being queer, but it's like, they're just trying to make both sides happy. Like they're trying to make me happy, while at the same time not upsetting the people who would be upset by my inclusion. And I'm like, you can't have it both ways.
Dumbledore.
J.K. Rowling.
Well, there's a possibility she might be more open about Dumbledore being gay with the new film series.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to think about like when the
All right, we're getting Pink Panther in here.
when the books came out, like that was like that was early '90s. So like the time frame in which Harry Potter was released and actually approved, and probably how many times it probably actually got shut down before it actually made to print, could have completely changed the story, just circumstantially. But I guess my question is like, what do you want to see more of in like horror? Like as like a person who just like I want to come in, have a like good time, really like find something unique. Like what are the things that you or anybody else want to see more in like games or in like media? Like what do we want as a community to put forward and like in this space that we have?
Personally, for me, I want to see more flamboyant characters that last more than 5 seconds. And I don't mean like throw every stereotype at the wall and they all stick, but I mean very effeminate gay men, because I feel like while we're towing towards more inclusion, we're towing towards safe inclusion. So you have the more masculine straight men, the more masculine like gay men, the more straight appearing women, stuff like that. People don't want to have the butch lesbian because, oh, well, that's just a stereotype, or the effeminate gay man because, oh, that's just a stereotype. No one's like that. No, there are people, and the problem becomes because that's the only character you're creating, it becomes the token, it becomes the only stereotype. But if you create across the spectrum where we have, okay, you got the butch football playing gay dude, and you have the effeminate guy over here, you have the butch lesbian, you have the femme, you have across all the spectrum. I feel that once people stop being afraid of just going with a well-rounded character, but then you have the problem in horror where there's really no well-rounded characters, which is why I feel queer horror is so, so important, because you can explore these nuances while still also having a character who doesn't have to have a full life story background before something happens.
Anybody else?
There's a couple.
Were you putting me or something behind me?
I saw his hand go up, so, or their hand, I'm sorry.
I guess I'm just wondering if anyone have good recommendations for you or anyone else, like either like queer horror or just horror that you write into that was queer.
Like movies, games, anything, or book-wise, I recently finished. It's an older anthology. It's like 10 years old at this point. Beyond the Landscapes, original game, lesbian horror. I found extremely good. Wasn't tropey from my experience. Fortunately, no trans characters or anything like that. But that's definitely the best queer fiction, horror fiction I've read in a while.
Why don't you give out a card to people who have recommendations and you put it up on the site?
Yeah, I can do that too.
And that way we can condense the list and research things.
And Keith Jemison has a series called, I think it's The Killing Moon, I think is the name of the series. Do you remember? It's
I don't know the name of the series.
yeah.
I know what starts with it though.
Yeah, it's a series that's set in the Middle East, in a Middle Eastern style country that's fantasy, but it's very horror based, and I don't want to give it away, but there's really good queer representation in it, and like really good relationship with both.
I'm gonna cut the discussion only a little bit because it's almost 8:15, and I'll let people have like the 15 minutes to mingle, grab my card if they want it, stuff like that. But is there any other questions before I let?
What's your favorite scary movie?
Favorite scary movie? Like campy story or campy scary?
What's your favorite? Just the thing that speaks to you. That's just
I
like the best.
have to say Cabin in the Woods. I really like Cabin in the Woods. Martyrs is another movie I really, really, really like. Not the remake, the original, because I don't know why they remade that movie. Martyrs is also, I would say, a very queer movie in and of itself. That's more psychological horror than like monsters and stuff like that. And then for campy, I love the Evil Dead series because I'm a bad person.
If you hadn't brought that up, I'd be very mad at you.
If I didn't bring up Evil Dead?
Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Oh, you pulled them out of my bag. All right. So yeah, if anyone recommendations stuff like that, I can compile a list, no problem. So.
Oh, actually, I have
Okay.
a recommendation for everybody. I
Okay.
brought it up to you before. Ichi the Killer, the manga is really gay.
What's it
It's
called?
Ichi the Killer.
Yeah, it's on my
it was-
list.
It's the thing is, it's rough to get through because the movie is very ridiculous, but it also finds a perfect balance of
I
like.
didn't focus on like outside of Western because that's not really my comfort zone, so to say. And with cultural differences and stuff like that, I don't feel that's necessarily my place to kind of throw my.
Oh no, I meant like.
I know.
Yeah.
Just in general, just as a thing, I'm saying like the reason this was so Western focused is because I don't feel it's my place to kind of inject into culturals that I'm not really.
It's a huge like difference, and like especially like because I watch a lot of like Korean horror films and stuff like that.
Oh, I love
and
foreign horror,
you like
right?
really have to like at least like watch a few like especially like Korean horror, watch a few K-dramas, see what their norm is, and then go into their horror movies and be like, oh, that's fucked up. But you wouldn't understand like as an American like coming in.
Does I Saw the Devil count as horror, even though it's not technically horror?
I mean, a good way to like enter into that is to watch like The Ring and then like watch the remakes in the U.S. and then watch the originals
Like
side by side.
Ju-on and stuff like that.
Ju-on
yeah.
especially, if you watch them side by side, you see the difference in the culture like of horror over there. Because Ju-on, the Grudge over there is about personal responsibility and repression and family and familial responsibility. And the remake that they made is all about xenophobia and like being isolated in a country that's not your own. And it's really like there's tons of really like, and if you don't understand it, like, and I don't, like, that was part of the paper I wrote about, which was like, I don't get all of it because it's not my culture, and that's the problem. It's that like when you're watching it, you're sort of inferring things based on your own culture that you don't get, right? And so like,
That can make it more terrifying sometimes, though. It's something that you're so not familiar with that it's like
taking you out of your comfort zone.
and that's what the remake was
Which
about.
is what horror movies and fear ultimately does, is it takes us out of our comfort zone. So.
And another good one, Shudder. Shudder was good.
And
the funny thing is, I didn't like watch the Taiwanese version until like.
This time? Thank you,
time.
sorry.
Yeah, I didn't watch that version until like I met Roshni. So we were both talking about the same movie. Like we were dating, we were talking about the same movie, and we're just like, wait, are we talking about the same movie? Yeah, we're talking about the same movie. She pulled up the Taiwanese version, I pulled up the American version, and we watched both. And it was totally like
it's night and day.
And something can be shot for shot, like
and
The
even
Grudge
shot
was
for
shot
shot.
for shot in some, like the same director handled both of them, the remake and the original.
That's
And
interesting.
Yeah, like I watched a whole documentary about like the director literally taking Sarah Michelle Gellar through the same scenes that were done in the original, and how it's so different and so incredibly like how they like shifted it on its head. And yeah, if you want to take a look at how culturally that changes, it's really great DVD to look at.
The Ring also did that, didn't it?
Yep, in a lot of parts of it. And again, it changes everything.
Yeah.
It changes everything.
This is a cool panel.
Thank you.
Would you say Silence of the Lambs in some way? I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
we talked about how that's
It's
along
not
with
queer
like
horror, but
It's not queer.
it's
so problematic.
Hannibal, the TV show.
Horrible.
yeah, it's horrible in the
What? Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs is a movie. I appreciate it and I enjoy it, but at the same time, you have to dissect on how horrible people took the character and how people take that and how it plays into the dangerous trans woman, the psychopathic trans woman, like that whole like Insidious 2 does, and the whole kind of thing like that.
I actually recently read an article about it was totally ignoring the problematic aspect of Silence of the Lambs and saying, actually, no, it's not a good movie. And that it was going from the standpoint that it does not use suspense, instead it just keeps momentum going, and that if you like break down the way that things from a narrative perspective, it just completely doesn't flow together. I don't know exactly. I was not very good at summarizing it. Anyway, so I question why you like Silence of the Lambs.
Psychology major. I mean, it's not that it's like, oh, this is the best movie ever or anything like that. It's just more of I appreciated the journey and stuff like that through the movie. It was just more, it's for an entertainment aspect and not like a, oh, this movie's deep and philosophical or anything like that for me.
I mean, I saw it in high school, which is a very, I don't know, like more than 10 years ago for me. And what stuck with me was the relationship between the two main characters. What's her name?
Hannibal Detective.
Clarice.
Yeah,
Clarice.
that's the thing that stuck with me in the movie, which I guess is an interesting interplay. It's just like it's been for a long time.
I like horrible things. I like Criminal Minds, so I mean.
And so that's
Criminal Minds is awful. Oh, it's trash.
But it's
It's one of
interesting
my
that
mother's favorite shows, and it makes me so upset.
It's so bad.
Always like Mother Why.
I mean, it is interesting that relationship between the what's his name? Hannibal and the FBI person,
Clarice.
a different FBI person, is what sort of really got played up in the TV show, which I've seen about.
Oh, Will.
Well,
Yeah.
And what's
Yeah.
interesting is how the fandom, in a lot of ways, has twisted that into, like, looking into it as a queer relationship, which has been really messy. Yeah, like, it's really messy and weird.
TV show. Yes, he was.
He was in
Yes.
both the movie and
Yes.
the show, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that wasn't touched on initially, but it was
Oh,
implied.
no, it was not implied. In Silence of the Lambs, he is very,
Not off
very
the bat.
queer. like one of
Red
the
Dragon,
victims
I'm
is
pretty sure
another
there was also a
dude.
lot of
It's not
Red Dragon, yeah, that was.
Yeah.
He's gay.
Hannibal was,
He's
I
like
guess,
pan as
bi-
fuck, isn't he?
yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Ah.
He's completely queer.
Yeah.
One of the victims in Silence of the Lambs is another man, and it's
It was one of his lovers. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So ignoring the whole like the transgender aspect of Silence of the Lambs, you get into the like actually interesting part of the movie.
You're not.
Silence of the Lambs is one of those things that's like this is horrible, but at the same time, I don't know.
Probably.
Yeah, we should probably. Yeah. I think we're gonna get kicked out of the room soon. Technically, I think we were supposed to be out at 8, but
I think cleanup's by 8:30.
cleanup's by 8:30, so I mean we have time. But thank you all for coming.